Hi, this is Kelsey Fukowski, and in this video we're going to be continuing our introduction to U.S. government as part of the AP U.S. Government and Politics course. So in this video we're going to be concerned about how power is distributed, and this is part of a major concept that you should be very much familiar with respect to the AP government exam. Majoritarian politics, the concept in which you have elected officials as the delegates of the people, sort of the hallmark of a democratic republic. If you recall in the previous video, we discussed that we are not truly a real democracy. Yes, I mean, we have many elements and components of democracy in our political system, but in a true democracy, you would not have any politicians. However, because it's time consuming, we have lives, we have jobs, it would take a very, very dedicated person to be truly informed, and that's why we elect politicians in our democratic republic. But how is political power distributed? There are three main theories, and I want to stress that these are theories. Of course, you might have some evidence of this that might support each one, but at the end of the day, these are theories of how political power is distributed. You should undoubtedly be familiar with all three. Typically, you're going to see a question on this every year. So you have pluralist theory, you have hyperpluralism, and you have elite. Let me go through each one. So with pluralist theory, this emphasizes that politics is mainly a competition amongst groups, each pressing for its own preferred policies. Basically, when you look at interest groups, whether this be AARP, the NRA, the NJEA for New Jersey for teachers, or the NEA, more nationally speaking, for the National Education Association, they're all competing to influence policy. And with pluralists, they believe that groups will work together, that really no one interest group is going to be dominating over the other. It's almost like a healthy competition. It's also a little bit more optimistic and has a benign look as to how power is distributed. Ultimately, at the end of the day, according to pluralists, public interest will prevail through bargaining and compromise. So it's a little give and take. No particular interest group is going to be dominating. And again, it's all groups working together, no domination. So again, a very nice idea of how power is distributed in government. Contrast this with hyperpluralism, who take a little bit of a more negative approach, that these interest groups are so strong that the government is weakened, as if it's almost a servant to certain interest groups. Because let's face it, that politicians tend to want to appease and placate every group. So by doing that, by saying, yes, we will represent your idea and put it into policy, and yes, we'll represent your political beliefs and put it into policy, at the end of the day, you're going to have what's called policy gridlock, where you have, in some ways, contradictory and confusing policies. So a good example of this was prior to the legalization of gay marriage, where in Texas, in many southern states, you had laws banning gay marriage, yet if you were to go to in most states in the Northeast, it was legal. And again, take the same issue and relate it to abortion. That is still a very much of a decisive issue, where you have various laws depending on what state you're in, sometimes very confusing and very much contradictory depending on which states you're going to. So as a result, hyperpluralists take a more negative approach and look at political power not really being distributed all that well, and almost hijacking the government. And really, when you have policy gridlock, not a lot tends to happen all that well. And then the final theory that, as part of the overall three theories as outlined in the AP Gov curriculum, is the elite theory. And this is the idea that American democracy is essentially controlled by wealthy and private individuals who do not hold office. A good example of this is the Koch brothers, who are these billionaires who have been known to donate millions of dollars to political campaigns. You also have other millionaires and billionaires, such as George Soros on the left, who has been known to donate millions of dollars. Also, if you think about the recent rise of super PACs, how money is just very much controlling elections. And this also has a more of a negative and pessimistic view of how political power is distributed. That if you're an ordinary person in the United States making $50,000 a year, that your vote is really not, in your say essentially, is not going to matter as much as somebody who is a millionaire or billionaire. So even if you look too at the percentage of millionaires in Congress, you have about 50% of Congress being millionaires. In the general electorate, you have under about 1%. So as a result, the idea of elite theory is that these policies are going to be benefiting those with money and power, that this is sort of corrupting the entire system. So certainly a very negative view towards that, along with hyperpluralism, but certainly with elite theory, you're seeing really the concentration of power with only a few as opposed to interest groups with hyperpluralism. Now, another important thing to be familiar with is political culture. And this is a set of values and beliefs shared within a society. And of course, this is going to be different depending on the country. Every country has a set of values that are unique. Sometimes you have them overlapping. For example, within American culture, liberty, the idea of freedom, and other ones as well, egalitarianism with respect to equality, individualism, laissez-faire, and that is very important. I want to emphasize laissez-faire, the idea of free market capitalism. That is very much entrenched into American culture. There has been somewhat of a backlash towards socialism. If you look in Europe, you have more countries that tend to be more socialistic, and that aligns more with their political culture. Yet in the United States, if you look at the outrage that some had toward universal health care, that is very much indicative of this laissez-faire concept, where government should have a very limited role in the economy, and also the idea of populism as well. So these 5 components do define American culture. What is important to think long-term with AP Gov, especially as you're going to be approaching other units and the exam itself, is this particular graph here, that you have people, you have interests, you have problems and concerns. These are relayed, which we're going to be getting towards something called linkage institutions that link people to the policy agenda. Because at the end of the day, people are concerned about influencing policy. For example, whether or not there should be assault rifle bans, whether or not there should be higher taxes. So at the end of the day, people are all trying to compete to make policy or influence it. And we're going to be getting through all of these components within this particular graph. So it's a very good graph to look at and keep close to you throughout the year. And just real quickly, some challenges to democracy. I'll highlight just a couple of these. Escalating campaign costs. If you look at how expensive elections are, certainly the role of money in elections, even if it's just at a local congressional race, as opposed to presidential elections, you're still spending a good amount of money. And if you just look down here at the bottom graph, if you look at the 2000 election, $1.7 billion, if that wasn't a lot. If you go all the way up to $4.2 billion in 2012, certainly money is influencing. This is all national elections at this point. Also, you have diverse political interests that is representative in the United States, which is, prides itself on diversity, which is a fantastic thing. However, at the same time, with so many competing interests, you can have policy gridlock. So this is going to be a word that you're going to see a lot, especially as we get further entrenched into our policy and bureaucracy unit. Okay, let's end with a review question. Which of the following characterizes the main difference between pluralists and democratic theorists? Take a moment to look at these questions. Remember, there can only, of course, and I'm stating the obvious, only one correct answer here. So just pause that button if you want to take a look at it, and I'll review which one is correct. All right, if you said the second choice here, pluralists emphasize competition among groups, whereas democratic theorists emphasize consent of the governed, you are correct. This is undoubtedly a pluralistic idea, and when we're talking about groups, we're talking about interest groups. There's an entire chapter just on that, which we'll certainly get to as well. You would not say the first choice because it's talking about the role of masses as individual people. Really, pluralists are emphasizing groups. When we look at the third choice here, looking at the inability of officials to compromise. Well, we said that earlier that pluralists believe that compromise will prevail at the end of the day, so we could eliminate the third choice. Here, this is looking at really the elite theory. that it's really controlled by a few, but pluralists believe that there are many groups competing equally, so that we could throw out that fourth choice. Then the fifth choice, saying that government is effective. You have to go a little bit further than that. Being effective is very, very broad. I think the most specific and overall best answer is the second choice. So if you got that, kudos to you. So we'll end here for our first chapter.